Hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of In a Heartbeat. I'm your host, John Clor, and I think I have a real special topic for you today, but I'll let you be the judge. Just as I think what you're going to find a little bit later on is that there are a lot of things going on in our life that affect our health and safety and well-being. And of course, if you've watched this show for a while, you know that sooner or later I'm going to get around to talking about cars. Our founder and a producer of this show, In a Heartbeat, Liz Aiken, used to always call on me to bring in the latest trends that's going on in the industry when it comes to safety technology. And it was always fun talking to her. But today I'm going to bring in an expert on the field, and I say an expert because I know you're out there on the internet, you're looking about blogs and all the writers that are out there. Seems today there are a lot of guys that have an internet connection and a laptop and they become an expert. But the guy we're going to talk to today has been around a while, been inside the industry on both sides of the fence, both on the writing side, the magazine side, the PR side, knows the industry in and out, and he's kind of a techie, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun with my old buddy, Chris Sawyer. Chris, welcome to In a Heartbeat. You know, we had a lot of fun back in the day at Auto Week 20 years ago, and when you moved on and tried to help the OEMs at Lotus, and then even further on in the magazine business with your work at Automotive Industries and Automotive Design and Production. Yeah. It was a lot of fun, but nowadays the industry is taking leaps and bounds, and we have so-called experts that are just along for the ride. So what I want to do today is I want to break with that tradition, Chris, and I want to really dial in on the technology side, but not in the way I think our viewers are going to expect. In the typical ways that I would do shows with Liz, I'm not going to just talk about the technology. I want to talk about what it really means when it comes to the automobile itself, our safety and well-being, and the whole concept of driving. Right. So when I talk about that, Chris, let's get into it right off the top. I mean, we have seen the car evolve so far in these last 20 years. I remember back when I was taking driver's ed, and they'd show the black and white films of the carnage on the highway. Remember that? Absolutely. And they'd say, you know, we were just getting safety belts back then, but wear your safety belt. And the rules of the road, you had to learn them, because if you didn't know them or you weren't paying attention, death would be the result, or serious injury. And then as we grew up and airbags became common, we started to see the death rate go down. And I noticed just the other day, the death rate in automobiles is the lowest it's been in history, partly because we're driving a little bit less because of the cost of gas, but a lot of it is, Chris, we have really safe cars today.
Oh, absolutely. But you also forget the economy. Every time the economy goes down, the death rate in the highway goes down. Not just because people aren't driving, but because they aren't exuberant. They aren't out there having fun. They're doing a task, and they're going from A to B, and that's all it is for them. Right. So there is if you really want to cut the death rate on the highway, just have a depression. We'd probably keep everybody alive.
Give everybody off the highway.
They'd be jumping off buildings instead.
Well, but here's the issue that I'm looking at now. I say, okay, we had the airbags came in, safety belts. I preach on this show, always wear your safety belt. Folks, if you're not wearing your safety belt, you're making a huge mistake. The airbag alone isn't meant to work by itself. It's meant to work in conjunction with the safety belt. And our car, we see these horrible crashes and people walk away all the time. But the issue we're having today now is we're getting more and more technology in the car, which is taking more and more of our driving skill out of our brains.
Absolutely.
So when I talk about something like that, we're just hearing in the news today, we're so used to ABS. That we really don't, there's no braking technique anymore. It's a matter of slam on the brakes when you see somebody jump in front of you.
Absolutely, but I can remember, not to toot my own horn, but the first story I ever wrote about anti-lock brakes was in Auto Week, and it's still required reading for the Secret Service. And the reason is because it talks about the fact that you may think that this is going to save your life, you may think that it's going to do all this wonderful stuff for you, but you're still involved in the process of bringing that car to a stop. The only thing that ABS really does, and this is what people forget, it doesn't make you stop faster, it can't. It doesn't make you stop quicker, except in certain circumstances where you have a very low coefficient of friction on the road.
Right.
What it does allow you to do, and what it was designed to do, was it still gave you the ability to steer around the obstacle in front of you. So hit the brake as hard as you can, but steer away from what you're going to hit.
Folks, that's the
And
first.
if you're looking at it, you're going to hit it.
Oh, yeah,
because
if you
you
see it.
automatically go to it.
The first thing they'll teach you in a driver's school, I don't know if you've ever been to one of the great driver's schools. I know that some of the OEMs have them. We used to have one at the Bondurant School, and I think now they've got one out at Miller Motorsports Park. That when you go to the schools, you think you really know how to drive, and then they'll teach you that almost everything you can steer out of. And really, in our minds today, we don't really think that way. So I'm kind of thinking maybe now, so our driving skills have diminished. Even though
absolutely.
our cars are getting better, we're not as good as we used to be.
No.
And our whole generation of understanding the technology, we're letting the technology do the work.
Absolutely. Do you remember the days that, I mean, it still snowed a lot in Michigan, but people used to be driving 454 Chevelles with bias-plied tires to work.
Yeah, Mustangs with...
And we didn't have traction control, we didn't have ABS, we didn't have vehicle stability control. I'm not saying that I don't want these things, I want those things.
Okay.
I definitely want them in my car, they're very important. But you cannot rely upon them to get you out of trouble and say, oh, the technology will save me, therefore I don't have to pay attention.
Right.
Not at all. They are an assist to what you're doing. And we're getting into a situation now where we have technologies that are just blossoming and quickly because we're in the midst of probably the second generation of the electronic revolution. It used to be that Moore's Law said every 18 months the electronics would change. That is now happening in the industrial sense. In automotive, every 18 months, you're now getting a new generation of what's going on, but you're also getting something else we've never had before called sensor fusion, where you can take all of the discrete elements around the car and you can send them into a central ECU, the electronic control unit, or a couple of them, and have them talk to each other. And they decide, because of all of the work that was done by an engineer slogging around at a proving ground for mile after mile after mile, what needs to be done next. You're going to get to the point in less than 5 years, actually it'll happen probably next year on certain Mercedes and Audi models, that the car will be able to steer around an object in front of you. It will be able to bring you to a complete stop. You will be able to turn your cruise control on and never have to turn it off until you get home and turn the car off in the driveway, because it will bring you to a complete stop each time and it will start you up again.
You know, I have to tell you this. My wife Jenny, we travel a lot, and when I'm on the highway, I use cruise control. I know it's the better way to drive out there for fuel economy. The engine's on a more steady speed. But she doesn't like it when we might approach a car and I have to get over and I might get a little too close to that car in front of me just so that I don't have to touch the brake and merge smoothly. She hates that. But this new adaptive cruise control, Chris, we're talking about a car that's really kind of doing your thinking. It knows the space between you and the car ahead of you, using the sensors and the radar. And then on top of that, if for some reason in your mind it's not time to brake, the car may decide it's time to brake.
Oh, absolutely, because it's reading, you have to set in how big of a lead you want the car in front of you to have. And while you're used to driving and you can see that lead start to diminish, and you're saying, okay, I'm decelerating at this rate and that's safe because I know I still have enough left.
Right.
The vehicle is now saying, no, 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 sir, you set this at this amount, I'm going to come to a stop. Or, as that Mercedes commercial we were talking about in the green room was all about, that all these people talking about, well, I didn't know the car in front of me had stopped, but my car did. Well, pay attention, guys, come on.
That's right.
I don't want any of those folks behind me on the road. But thank God that Mercedes will stop for you. And that is going to become standard equipment within 10 years on just about every car, from the highest to the lowest out there.
Scary. You know, this is the question we have to ask ourselves. Do we want these technologies? Now, cruise control is great. We use it. We like it. But now they want to improve it to the point where it's going to take some of the decisions away from you. Now, do we really want to advance our technologies to this point where the decision-making is removed? And then the whole idea of visually, I was just talking to a young kid the other day, and he was saying, did you drive that car with a blind spot
information system? Yeah.
I did. And you know what, Chris? I liked it. And he tells me, well, you must be getting old, John, because why would you need a blind spot information system? You know, just look around, turn over.
But you need one, because we have moved so far ahead. Here's one thing that happens with government standards. Government standards, once you set a standard, you always have to improve upon it. Even if there's no real call for it, or anything that says, okay, Maybe when we set the first standard, we saved 10,000 lives, and then we improved it, we saved 5,000. We improved it again, 1,000. Now we're getting down to hundreds or even tens of lives.
Right.
Now, every life is precious. I'm not saying that. But at what point do you have the diminishing returns
for society?
For society, but also for the personal responsibility of the driver and passengers.
Right.
And we have gotten to the point where, for example, roof crush standards, say that five times fast.
I remember the old roof crush and Volvo commercials.
Exactly, but now they're so tight that if you drive any car today, you look at the A-pillars, those that are supporting the windshield, they're so thick you can lose cars going at an intersection. So now what do? BMW's just introduced the intersection camera.
Oh, no.
There's a camera that points to the left, one that points to the right, and then it presents you on the screen what's going on in front of you, so you know that you can turn out safely. Well, you look over your shoulder. You can't see anybody over there.
Right.
But it comes back down to something that a Volvo engineer told me at a conference once. He said, you don't need things like this. Quite honestly, you don't. You can have the little mirrors that we have in Europe, but aren't allowed, by U.S. law, that are curved such that they will show you what's in your blind spot. Right. But what it really comes down to is you have to understand how to set your mirrors in the first place. And most people don't know how to do it.
Chris, I'm glad you brought this up. When I started driving, I had those bullet sport mirrors on my car, and they're about this big.
And worthless.
And you had to use them. I think the #1 piece of technology on every car that's never used is the turn indicator. I don't know about you, but people seem to think that it's just okay for you to watch where I'm going, and you kind of guess what's going to happen next. That piece of equipment, if it was used, and the mirrors, which not only do we not know how to adjust them, we don't know how to use them.
Right.
If those two pieces alone, Chris, were used, don't you think, I mean, accidents, the kind of accidents that happen when someone's in your blind spot would go down? Do we need a blind spot because my whole argument here is it's a great piece of technology, but there goes added cost to your car.
Right. And you don't have at some point you're not going to have a choice of whether you have it or not.
Right.
Yes and no. I think yes, the accident rate would go down, but only if people are paying attention. And unfortunately, they're not. You and I both know people who are enthusiasts, who have driven cars, who know how important this is, and you still see them every so often answering a text, answering a phone call without using the hands-free, all that sort of stuff. I was in the new Lincoln MKX. You know, it's got the My Lincoln Touch, all that sort of stuff. I mean, John, I got lost in the darn thing, and I was to the point where I could find out what the internet address of the vehicle was, and I'm like, I don't care.
I want to pay attention.
I want to get back out of this thing, and I understand what you're doing. I understand that there are power users. I understand that electronics is becoming so prevalent that people are thinking that they have to have it in every part of their life. And to be able to answer the phone, to answer these things while you're on the road is important. However, what we forget is that when you're in the midst of a conversation, whether it's with a passenger or whether it's somebody on the phone, you lose a second of reaction time. At 60 miles an hour, that's a football field.
Could be the difference.
Are you willing to give that up? Well, or are you willing to turn it over to a system that's going to watch out for you and eventually be in a car that you don't drive, you just sit in there as a pod and it's public transportation?
Well, that's the whole point. I think now we start to think about the kinds of technologies that Chris and I are talking about now are starting to take the decisions away. And when that happens, then maybe you should just consider, don't even drive at all. Get on the bus, take the train, do the, you know, carpool perhaps, because I think, Chris, that's the issue. And
but it's not just the decision making is taking away; it's the responsibility.
Yeah, and the attention you would pay normally.
Right, exactly.
Without the technologies, you're kind of forced to pay attention. Which brings me to another thing. Let's talk about. We just had a law that was being passed about rear view cameras. Now, I have driven a lot of the new models with the rear view cameras, and you know what? You throw it in reverse, and all of a sudden you see the display, and you can see the lines, and you say, "Wow, that's kind of cool." And I do look, you know, and I also have a car that's equipped with the rear sensors, so when I go to the Wings game and I'm backing into a parking spot, and you know you're in between two cars and they're trying to park you tight, you can hear beep 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 if you're getting too close to the wall. Right. Rather than in the old days, I just run into it. You know, those are all wonderful things, and they're not really dependent upon my skill as a driver, but they do help me. I understand that. But my question is, do I need that kind of technology? I mean, is that something you really want in your car?
Yes and no. I think it's funny that You can get all those things on a Mini Cooper. If you can't see the back end of a Mini Cooper, you should go to the ophthalmologist and be declared legally blind, quite honestly.
It's right over your shoulder.
Exactly.
It's right here.
I mean, I had one, for God's sake.
That's right.
But they are aids. And as an aid, great, wonderful. I don't mind having it. But we start to depend upon them. And it was a discussion I was having with Roger Becker at Lotus Cars one day. And we were talking about anti-lock brake systems, and he said, wonderful technology, I hate it. Now, what? He goes, look, we, up to this point, have had to learn how to threshold brake, to get up to the point where the brakes lock, and then to back off a little bit, and to keep that car sitting there. He says, now we don't have to do it. He says, it's like saying to a Neanderthal, okay, you got to rub 2 sticks together to make fire. Oh, by the way, here's a lighter. Now you don't have to worry about it.
It just takes the whole skills gone.
You know, you lose things, and granted, there are certain things that we're going to have to lose over time because we evolve into different creatures, into different situations. But we cannot get to the point where we rely so heavily on technology that we give up the responsibility for driving the car, and we lose, in effect, the joy of being connected to this mechanical piece and going through time and space and being in charge of it. It's our own little spaceship, if you want to go, think of it that way.
It's our traveler.
We're traveling through 3 dimensions, and if we just turn it over to the computers, why not just stay at home and watch it on TV?
Exactly. It's a video game.
It's the difference between saying I have some really close friends and I've got 500 people who are my friends on Facebook.
Are they your friends?
They're not your friends unless they're going to lend you $50 and come over and help you move.
That's right. Otherwise
just forget it. They're just somebody you know.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. And when you think about it, you think about what we're adding to our cars. It's not just that technology piece, what it's taken away. You know, Chris and I talked earlier about, you ever notice in our Detroit area in the wintertime, the people that have the all-wheel drive or the four-wheel drive SUVs, they're off there in the snow on your freeway, and they're driving at 50, 60, 70, when really you should be driving at 35 to 45 in a snowfall on the interstate. What happens? What are the cars you see in the ditch? They're the SUVs. And they think, well, I have four-wheel drive, not really realizing the physics of that contact patch of their tire is the same as your car, whether you have front drive or not. I, Chris, enjoyed driving in the winter with a Mustang, stick shift, with snow tires, and I would love to go out and spin around in the parking lot before I took off.
But you said the magic word, too, snow tires. People forget that it isn't the traction control and everything else that controls how well
the electronics.
It's the tires.
Yeah.
And if you have a good set of snow tires in the winter, and I would suggest getting them if you've got a car that you're going to hold on to for a while, it makes all the difference in the world as to whether you can go somewhere or whether you can't. You'll say to yourself, I didn't know that a little front-wheel drive car would plow through this. Yeah, it will, because it's got the right tires on it.
And it's not ABS, it's not traction control, which is another common, and it's really not the four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. It's none of those things. It's none of that technology. It's the skill to understand when you're losing traction, if the car begins to spin, to know that you have to turn in the direction of the spin. All those things are kind of lost, which is why you see these chain reaction accidents.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, so if it's
and anybody can get involved in those accidents. I mean, nothing is, you can have all the skills in the world, but you're still going to have an accident. You're still going to have something go wrong. It's still possible. But if you don't have those skills, it's a lot more likely.
Yeah, I get to the point now where I'm thinking, okay, we've got this technology. What about things like the drowsy alarm? I don't know if you've heard about this one. You know, one of the top things on the highway, the dangers that we face, isn't just drunk drivers, that people are out there impaired. It's people who are tired. And Chris, there's a statistic that shows that there are more injuries and deaths from drowsy driving than drunk driving.
Right.
And it's kind of an epidemic, but we don't talk about it because it doesn't make the headlines of the news that someone fell asleep at the wheel and plowed in and had a one-car crash. And for some reason, we don't talk about it.
Because we also don't want to deal with the underlying theme of that, and that is, if you're drunk and you're behind the wheel, you did that. You drank all that stuff. We know how to fix that problem.
Yeah,
but if you're a tired person, what did it? Overwork, too much on your plate, having to get the kids from here to there after work, all this other stuff. And that's not talked about because society doesn't want to deal with that problem.
Yeah.
And so, well,
but how would a drowsy alarm know you're tired?
Oh, it's simple, because it's looking at your reaction speed. It's looking at your eye movement. There's a camera up behind
It's looking at you?
It's looking at you behind the rearview mirror, or even on the A-pillar, and it's reading your eye movement. And there is a very distinct level at which your eye movement starts to slow down as you're entering a phase of increased tiredness. Oh, and so by seeing that, it can do a number of things. It can either set the systems, if you have them in the car, to have a greater amount of control over the vehicle. Or it can actually introduce different smells into the vehicle that will perk you up. That's one thing the Japanese have been doing now for almost 20 years. Or, well, I think, quite honestly, we should get to electroshock therapy.
Slap you in the face.
Wake up. You will get to points where it will vibrate the seat. It will do things like that and wake you up and change things up for you that you will have momentary lucidity. But it's then got to find another way to do it, because that only lasts for so long when you're tired.
You've been tired and you've been in the car, you've rolled the window down in the winter and you felt the cold air, you shook your head, try to wake yourself up.
And I've been one of those drivers.
Oh, who hasn't?
I mean, a 12-hour drive to Montreal, that'll do it for you.
Oh, yeah.
And you get into those situations and it is just pure bullheadedness that makes you not want to stop.
That's right, because I want to get there by this time.
Exactly, and when you should be going to the Tim Hortons and just going, okay, I'm going to get some coffee.
Get a coffee and go in.
But
absolutely.
We're getting to the point where, and I don't want to say this technology is bad. It's really good stuff. Don't force it on me. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons is that if you look at for example, airbags. Airbags didn't come because they were mandated. Airbags are a technology that quite honestly didn't work. They were filled with sodium azide, a class 3 explosive that you couldn't even mail to the post office.
That's right.
Because it was explosive. And that was what made it fill up with air very quickly. Well, we've now got different propellants, we've got different ways of doing it, things have gotten better, but what made an airbag work wasn't because the government mandated it, it was because Lee Iacocca was sitting there at Chrysler going, dear God, we're going under, we got to figure out a way to get people to buy our cars. Safety, airbags, let's sell this, see if it works. Right. Iacocca was probably one of the best marketing men that's ever been in this industry. And by doing that, he forced an entire industry to adopt airbags as standard equipment.
When there was some resistance to adding the technology?
Lots of it, and not just from the car companies, but from the public at large, who was scared of these things.
You guys remember when we had the 3-point belt mandate by the government that required the belt to be put over your shoulder? Some of them, they called them the wild mouse, that would run up the door side and automatic, because you wouldn't put that 3-point belt back in the day before they were mandated. People would unplug the buzzer underneath their seat. That when the government mandates something that you don't really necessarily want, you'll find ways around it. And so, think about taxes. How many guys try to avoid their taxes by, offshoring to Switzerland? This is what we did with our cars. And the technology, what we were doing is avoiding buying the technology. My point, Chris, and the reason why I wanted to really bring this up to our viewers today, is that all of these things we talked about, and one that my wife really likes is one that General Motors I know is working on now, is this infrared technology that we use for the Border Patrol and the United States Army, to heat sensors that they can put on your car to detect when deer are out in the woods, not even onto the roadway, not even into the area below the roadway, so that you can see them out of your sight. But they can tell when they're out there, and they would signal a warning that there could be a deer, to give you an alert to look out on the road. Now that kind of technology from the military, we're going to add this. That's a safety technology. People are running into deer, but do we need this?
No, well, let's look at the way Germany does it. Germany puts up 6-foot-high fences along the Autobahn. The deer can't jump them. And why did they do it? Yeah, it costs a lot of money. But if you look at how long it takes to change the fleet over in the United States, it takes anywhere from 16 to 25 years, depending on the economics. Right now, we're heading towards the 25-year point, where you're not going to, a car that is brand new today, in 2011, will not be fully through the fleet until 2036.
Yeah, we're keeping our cars
longer. Exactly,
because they last longer. Remember,
exactly.
100,000 miles was the magic number?
Oh, absolutely.
Everybody knows got 100,000 miles on their car.
Absolutely.
They're going for 2 and 250, and then when we talk about, the cars are no good today, let me tell you, with all that technology, what scares me is the electronics, Chris. I don't know about you. Have you guys got an old boombox CD player? Maybe you have an old VCR that you were using, and you went to plug in and it doesn't work anymore? And then you go to try to get it fixed, and they go, just throw it away.
Yes, we all forget the thing that is very true in electronics, is something called mean time between failures, or MTBF. Electronics will either last, the mean time between failures is the average that electronics will last. And that says you can expect 10,000 hours of use, let's say. Funny thing about electronics is they either expire immediately, or they last a hell of a long time. And so if you're one of those guys who has the ones that expires early, you take it to the dealer, you get a new chip put in, and you don't have to pay for it. Somewhere down the road, that chip is going to be totally obsolete.
And no one will make it.
And no one will make it. What they're trying to do now is they're trying to build upgradability into the vehicle so that it's more software based, much as they've done in fighter jets and other military equipment. Software is a smart way to do it, doesn't add any weight.
Right.
But, and you also get to keep the car longer and get more out of it over the lifetime. What happens though is that you eventually come to the end of the life of that electronic equipment. So and you're going to find the people who are now going to start saying with their cars, much as they do with their consumer electronics, well, gee, I don't have the latest, greatest stuff. I'm going to get rid of it, get the new one. Going to help everybody who's in the used car market, but, you know.
Well, I think this is a lesson for us, what Chris is talking about, because let's say, remember you had the old cell phone and it was analog, and you had to go digital. You might want to hang on to your cell phone, but now cell phones, you're kind of measured by how cool your cell phone is. Your TVs, everybody now has a flat screen. To have or even your computer monitors. This stuff is your laptop. If your laptop is more than say 3 to 5 years old, it's ancient. Your hard drive. You can get a hard drive and a zip drive that's got more. I remember my first computer at Edmunds.com when I started. Had a 3 gig hard drive. I can get 8 gig on a $19 zip drive. I really think this is a topic we got to bring Chris back and talk about more, because I think the bottom line is how much it costs us. If you add all this technology in a base car, you know, the days of a young person going out and buying a car that he could afford on a minimum wage is long gone. We'll have a $50,000 Focus or a Chevy Cruze pretty soon. Chris, we're going to have you back and talk about this. I'm almost out of time, and I just did want to mention for you car people out there that if you're in Grosse Pointe and you've always had, maybe you've got an old car, the one kind Chris was talking about that's 30 years old, the thing to do is to this fall during the Grosse Pointe Car Village greatest garage sale. It's the greatest street party ever, really. It's September 10th and 11th. They're now bringing in a car show element to the great village party, 2-day party. It's Saturday and Sunday, September 10th and 11th. We really want you to be part of it, of the world's greatest block party here in the village. So if you're interested, call Joel Armitage or email him with that number on your screen. Get your car out of the Grosse Pointe garages and get it out to the car show and kind of enjoy a lot of the heritage that's going around here. And then I think what we'll do is next time we'll come back, we'll talk about maybe the cars that we bought in yesteryear that we could afford, maybe the cars that we had to actually drive that didn't drive us, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely.
and the kinds of cars that you can go out and enjoy. I think for your health and well-being, for your safety, part of that is the ability to understand, let yourself drive the car. Well, that's all we have time for today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Until next time, remember, knowledge is power. I'm your host, John Clor. See you next time.